Hey guys, and welcome to our last part 12 of Romeo and Juliet, where we're going to look at the final scene of the play. So I'd invite you now, if you haven't read the last bit, to go ahead and read the last bit. It is the full scene, the full act 5, scene 1, 2, and 3. And listen to the audio and go ahead and watch the clips that I've shared with you that I think portray well those scenes. And of course, after that, you can come and review it with me here. So let's get started with our review. Now, I think that we're entitled to be a little bit sad when we come across this part because of two things. Okay, number one, it's a tragedy. And at the end, it just happens to be a very sad ending. And number two is that it's the end of this good story. And when we experience ending a movie or a story that just really we connect with, then I think that we know that it's the end and we're not going to interact and meet those characters anymore. And it just can be very sad. So if you're sad right now, it's totally legit, man. It's okay. Okay? Let's start. So scene 1 is not that sad. In fact, scene 1 begins very, very happily, as we'll take a look in the lines. So in Mantua, we find Romeo where he should be. We find that he has this dream that he had died, but that Juliet comes and wakes him with a kiss, and that was his dream, and he's so blissfully happy with that dream. We'll take a look at that line. Now let's go here. Shakespeare, he's not going to let us forget that the lovers are doomed. In fact, he's going to pry us and poke us a little bit to make the tragedy that much more tragic. And this is one of the ways he does it. We'll explain that when we look at that line from the story. Okay, we find out, and we already know that Romeo is waiting for word from the friar, but he hasn't heard any word from the friar yet. Now, we don't have a context of time here. We don't know. Is it Wednesday? Is it Tuesday? Is it Monday? Is it Friday? Is it 4 months from now? We don't really know, but we do get a hint very shortly of when the servant Balthazar reaches Romeo, and we find out it is after Juliet's death. In fact, it's immediately after. As soon as Balthazar sees Juliet dead, he comes and tells Romeo instantly. So however long it takes Balthazar to run to Mantua. Okay, he arrives to tell Romeo that Juliet was dead. So suddenly we get the context of time here and the fact that Romeo has not heard from the friar. Those are going to be two important things to drive home the end of the story. Now, forgetting his banishment, remember, Romeo's not supposed to go back to Verona. Romeo takes off for Verona anyways, but before he plans to. But before that, he stops to buy poison, just in case, from an apothecary. We'll talk about that when we look at the lines. Now, just in case what? Well, just in case he needs to poison somebody. Now, who we getting ideas here, foreshadowing, hints. We making inferences about who he intends to poison. Now, I want to point this out here. A couple scenes ago, we had Lady Capulet and Juliet sort of scheming, or Juliet agreeing to this scheme of Lady Capulet to poison Romeo, to send a poison to Romeo to kill him for murdering Tybalt in revenge. Now, ironically, we have Romeo buying that poison, fulfilling that desire that Lady Capulet had a couple scenes before. So, I mean, again, Shakespeare is giving us plenty of foreshadowing, coincidences that end up coming true. Now, Romeo has no clue that the friar had devised his plan with Juliet, thus his desperate actions. Now, he thinks Juliet is really dead, and he's going to sneak back to Verona for whatever reason we find out later. Now, scene 2, again, a very short scene. Scene 1's very short, scene 2 very short. They're like, and I just want to say that a lot of our scenes at the end of the play here have been really short. Okay, not very long, like they maybe were at the beginning of the play. And I think that accelerates the momentum of the story when you have these short, choppy scenes that are kind of giving a very quick occurrence. There's not a lot of time for characters to discuss and think and, just talk about things and talk them through and make right choices. They're actually rushed into actions and decisions, and we kind of get the effect that ball is picking up momentum and it's more and more unstoppable. And the ball is the flow of the plot, the story moving forward to inevitable tragedy, which we find in the last scene of the play. So scene 2 is very, very quick and very rapid, yet it's super important. What we find is behind the scenes, the friar had sent a messenger to Romeo. We already knew that was part of the plan. But Romeo never got the letter. And we'll look at the reason why. The friar who is sent to give the message to Romeo never gets it to Romeo. So the friar realizes that Romeo would not be coming to rescue Juliet, and the friar has to go and rescue Juliet. Now he's a little upset. We'll see when we look at the lines. We'll see that Friar Lawrence is concerned. He's like, oh no, the plan's going wrong. Juliet's going to wake up alone. What a bad thing. Little does he know, of course, that Romeo is on his way to Verona too. So what we have then as the audience, we know that Friar Lawrence has to beat Romeo to the tomb. At this point, at the end of scene 2, at the end of the second last scene of the whole play, there is still a possibility that things could work out because they came up with another plan. The other plan was this: Friar would grab Juliet, rescue her, hold her until she can be brought to Romeo or can be rescued by Romeo. Okay, so the plan could still work. The new plan was modified. It could still work. They could still live happily ever after. Yet, so even to the second last scene, it could still be a happy ending. Yet, we know it's not going to be. Now, is everything going to be all right? That's what we're left to think. That, yeah, it's still possible that it could be all right. Yet, for some reason, we know that it's not. So what happens to not make it right? Oh, man. Now we get to the Act 5, Scene 3, final scene of the play. Dead end, where the characters kind of meet that final dead end. And we have all this death and destruction. So let's look and see what are the points of this last scene of the play. Number 1, we see Paris visiting the tomb of Juliet. And we'll talk about maybe why that is. Romeo arrives at the tomb right after with his servant Balthazar. Now, don't forget, this is supposed to be Paris' wedding night. He is mourning the loss of his potential bride, who is not to be anymore. He really loved her. He was willing to spend the whole night mourning and throwing flowers on her grave, alone at the graveyard. Okay, that's his devotion to her. That's why he's there. Now he's there, and it's wrong. It's too bad because so Balthazar is commanded to leave, but he stays behind just to witness, although he doesn't want to get caught because Romeo says, kill him. But Paris tries to stop Romeo when he recognizes Romeo's there to open the tomb. We'll talk about the reasons why when we look at the lines. But in the end, they end up fighting, and Romeo kills Paris. So in this story, Romeo is responsible for killing so many people. In fact, most of the deaths you could trace back to Romeo's choices and Romeo's actions. So he's really the cause of all these deaths here. Okay, every one of them, which we can look at the end of the story. Now, finally, Romeo is able to enter the tomb. He was surprised. This is the irony. Well, look at this line. He's surprised at how beautiful Juliet looks, how lifelike she looks. He kisses her and then drinks the poison and dies immediately. So that poison is as powerful as the apothecary from Mantua had promised. Now, Romeo's not thinking straight. No one except the nurse and the friar knew that Romeo and Juliet were married. Romeo was bound to be a little upset. Okay. Of course, that his bride would be dead. And at the same time, the whole wedding is basically secret except to 2 or 3 people. We know Balthazar also knows about his wedding and love for Juliet. All right. It is told to us about half an hour Romeo had been in the tomb before the friar arrives. So that last scene, scene 2, when the friar makes off or sets off, he delays just too much, just minutes. All right. Now, some of the scenes you may have watched depict Juliet waking up before the friar gets there, or while Romeo is drinking the poison or whatever. So there are ways you can dramatize this and play with the suspense of this scene that some of the versions of Romeo and Juliet do. But in this one, in the original, the friar comes on scene. And Juliet awakes as soon as the friar gets there, so he comes there on time, and the friar tries to get Juliet to leave. But she sees Romeo there and refuses to leave. The friar runs away. Juliet sees that Romeo had taken poison. She tries to drink some, but the bottle's empty. So she tries to kiss his lips and take some poison off his lips, but that doesn't work either. She hears a sound, and she takes Romeo's dagger and stabs it through. She doesn't take much time to contemplate or think this through. She sees Romeo dead. She knows that she has awakened, and others are coming. So before they come to take her away, she takes the knife and right there stabs it into herself. Okay? We also find that hearing of her son's death, hang on a second, this is wrong. Hearing of her son's banishment and kind of dealing with that brokenheartedness, Lady Montague dies. We hear that very quickly, so we'll look at that line. And then finally, at the end, we have this whole court scene where everybody's puzzled by what they see, as we'll look. Okay, Paris dead, tomb open, Juliet freshly dead, Romeo laying there dead. All these people at the graveyard late at night. What's going on? And the prince comes on scene, and he investigates, gets all the witnesses to explain their parts of the story. And what we have is the friar being a good witness there, Balthazar, the page, the letter that Romeo had written. The nurse will become a future, witness to what the friar has said. So they validate all of this thing, and the notes of the story or the case. So the whole story that they try to unravel that night, that's so secretive that nobody knows about, is the exact story we've read. So they unravel the whole story and get all the facts. And after the end, the families agree to end the feud. Okay, we'll look at those lines too. Now, come on! Everybody dies? Well, Shakespeare told us at the very beginning, if you remember a couple weeks ago, in the prologue, that Romeo and Juliet were going to die, and that by their death, they were going to mend the feud. We weren't told how the story would take place, how fast, who's involved, and the details of the situation, but we knew the basics, and we saw it coming time and time again as Shakespeare's foreshadowing all these examples of foreshadowing to kind of sum up in that moment of the conclusion of the story here, where we have the tragic ending, all these deaths, and then the mending of the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues. But there's an interesting question here still, and that is, who is ultimately to blame for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet? I think that's a fantastic question I'd like you to think about. Who would you pinpoint the blame on? Because we could pinpoint the blame on lots of people. Now, of course, there's many people who have play a role in this death and tragedy at the end of the story. So ultimately, it's a lot of people who combined efforts. But who would you primarily blame? Who has the most fault in this? Okay, you could really find fault in everybody. Who's the most at fault? All right. That's it for our review. Let's go look at my top lines from this part of the play. All right. Act 5, Scene 1, my top lines. And by the way, this is a significant act. We're going through a whole act here. If this does take a little bit longer, bear with us, but it is important to consider the concluding methods and whatnot that we see in these last couple scenes. So let's take a look here. I got a couple from here. I would like to start from lines 5 to about 10, where Romeo says, "I dreamed my lady came and found me dead," or "I have something that gives me cheerful thoughts." And then he says, and where does it say she comes and kisses him? Okay, strange dream, the dead man leave to think and breathe such life with kisses in my lip. Okay, she breathed life back into him with a kiss on his lips, and he awoke. And that his dream was so rich in joy. Okay, Shakespeare is exaggerating here or putting really a high emphasis on Romeo's coincidental dream, which just so happens to be true, except flipped around. It's Juliet who's dead. It's Juliet who will be resurrected by Romeo being there. Not necessarily with a kiss, but that's, we will see that they do kiss. But this is also foreshadowing because instead of absolute joy, this is absolute tragedy. And Romeo here is in a happy, amazing, happy mood. Now, there's such a mood shift when we're introduced to Romeo in such a happy, having such an awesome dream that essentially comes true, except completely the opposite. And we see a mood shift when he finds out about Juliet's death. So, let's see here. Dost thou not bring me letters from the friar? So we find out that Romeo has not heard from the friar. We find out that from Balthazar, line 18, her body sleeps in Capel's monument, that Juliet is dead. Okay? I'm thinking line 31 here. Again, Romeo asked, have no letters from the friar? So we're at a point after Juliet has been buried, her funeral. Romeo has not heard from the friar, and Balthazar has rushed to Mantua to tell Romeo about Juliet's death. Okay, later on, now he's got this whole speech here about his memory of seeing an apothecary, basically a pharmacist, a druggist in town. And a pharmacist will know how to kill you, okay? A pharmacist would know what drugs or what poison to give for somebody to die. So an apothecary back in this time also would. So Romeo, for some reason, by chance, remembers, hey, if I need poison in Mantua, I bet you that shop could help me out. Well, just so happens he does need that help. So he goes and wakes up the apothecary and buys some poison. And we find out that actually it's against the law somewhere up here for a poison to be sold in Mantua, but Romeo convinces him by bribing him with money. And I like this line here. He says, as he pays for the poison, there is thy gold, worst poison to men's soul, doing more murders in this loathsome world than these poor compounds that thou mayest not sell. In other words, you think you're giving me the poison. No, I'm paying you the poison. The real poison is this gold. And gold is responsible for more murder than poisons have been responsible for murders. So, and I like that idea. We say that money is the root of all evil. And I wonder to what extent, money or wealth or competition for wealth had maybe in that feud between the two wealthiest families of Verona. Does Romeo have a good reason to say that wealth brings unhappiness, that wealth brings poison, has a poisoning, tainting effect on humanity? We actually know that's true. There's only so much money that we need that will make us happy. After that, it just tends to corrupt. Okay. And, as long as we got our basic life needs met, any wealth beyond that just tends to, corrupt us as humans. So it's interesting. Here's gold. This is worse poison than actual poison. Just a little comment there. Now, finally, what do we know that Romeo's about to do? He says, to Juliet's grave, for there must I use thee. We know he intends to go to Verona, to Juliet's grave. Okay, let's look at the next scene. So we're back, Act 5, Scene 2. Not too much to look at. As we said, this is a very quick scene, but I think it does illustrate what happened in the background here. So, Friar John, this new friar, he's another friar, was the one sent to give the message to Romeo. But on about line 15, we find out, I could not send it. Here it is again. I couldn't get a messenger to bring it to you. Now, do we know the reason why? Well, if you were looking up here, the reason is that Friar John goes and visits somebody on his way instead of immediately delivering the letter. And the person he visits is sick, so suspected of having the plague. So they actually Quarantine. This is an interesting connection to today, right? They quarantine Friar John, and he's not allowed to leave for a couple days. He couldn't even get anybody to take the letter from him because they feared the infection that might be there. Now, it turned out there was no infection. He's released and things are good, except the message was never sent. Here is the wrench in the plan. Here is the problem, and that is that the letter never gets to Romeo, and we have a good reason why. It is a plague. They think that there's this terrible disease. Now, two reasons why this is cool. Number one, we know that Shakespeare, in bubonic plague times, the Black Death had his, theaters because they were places of mass gathering banned. So theater was banned because of plague. So he incorporates plague into his own play, which is kind of interesting. This is a current event that he had experienced in his life, but I think it's also cool because it's a current event we're experiencing right now. This idea of plague, this idea of isolation or quarantine, and that is the reason why Romeo never gets the letter. So very cool life connection. And then at the end, we see this. Within these 3 hours, Juliet will awake, okay? And he goes to, he says this, poor corpse, closed in dead man's tomb. He's concerned more here with Juliet. He's not concerned about Romeo. If Romeo hasn't heard anything, no problem. We'll send a letter later. This can still work. I just feel sorry for Juliet, Friar Lawrence says. I got to go rescue her so that she doesn't wake up alone in the tomb, which is, by the way, one of the things that she feared the night she took the potion. So Friar Lawrence, within 3 hours, has to go rescue Juliet himself, and he'll send another letter to Romeo. So he's not too concerned, except for Juliet. Poor Juliet is going to wake up alone. Now, little does he know, Friar Lawrence, that in the scene earlier, Romeo already knows that Juliet is dead. If he knew that the knowledge of Juliet's death was something that Romeo was delivered, then maybe he would have acted quicker here, but he doesn't, as we'll see when we look at the next scene. So let's look at the next scene. The final scene. Lots to look at in that last scene. Great. So in Act 5, Scene 3, which is our last scene of the play, guys, we have a couple lines to look at. Bear with us here. A lot of characters come in and go, die, etc. Way more in here than we have time to look at right now. First line, about line 24. Romeo says, here's my letter. Early in the morning, see thou deliver it to my lord and father. I want us to remember this. This becomes a piece of evidence later in the story. It's also interesting because what kind of letter is this? Do you guys know, have you made the prediction, even though it hasn't been explicitly said, but we are given hint after hint after hint after hint of what Romeo intends to do? Yes, Romeo, but you've read the play, so you know what Romeo does. Romeo intends to drink the poison, and kill himself. So what has he done? He's written a letter to his father to explain what he has done. We understand that in that letter is contained the whole plan, his reason why he commits suicide and all that. So it reveals to his father. So what is that? It's a suicide letter. And that's really interesting because if we looked at the theme of suicide in this story, which we see happening at the end, or threats of it happening through the whole story, it's interesting that Romeo leaves this letter behind because that is something that is very typical to suicides, is these suicide letters. And suicide is a very serious thing. It is, the idea of self-harm or ending one's own life. We take very seriously. And this story, the story is not condoning suicide as a solution to things. In fact, we see the effects of suicide. Yes, it's touching that the two commit suicide at the end, but it isn't the solution. Even though it becomes the solution, we see how it affects all the people around them and that type of thing. So, we could go and dwell a lot more on this, but here's his suicide note, which I think is really interesting, that even back in Shakespeare's time, people contemplating ending their own lives would leave a note, which is morbidly something that a lot of people who commit suicide today even do, and even said that people contemplating committing suicide have their own suicide note already prepared in their pocket. I just want to say to you guys that I truly believe all your lives are completely worthwhile. And if you or anybody, is in the situation of ending their own life, find that help that you need to kind of get through that. Your life is worth it. And it's easy for me to say now, but it's a very serious thing. And, people ought to see the value and the beauty of their life. And I want to encourage you to know that your life is valuable and beautiful. Okay. It's such a heavy thing to have to talk about, but I don't want you to be reading this play thinking that, oh my goodness, suicide's a good solution to stuff. It isn't. Okay. But let's move on here. Of course, 39, we have, so Shakespeare does this all the time. And I like this. He says, my mood, Romeo is still speaking here, my mood is more fierce than empty tigers. That's such a great way to say, can you imagine an empty tiger? Well, we don't say it that way. We don't say it that way. We say hungry tigers. Okay, but if you replace the word hungry with empty, it's just such a unique way of speaking. Now, yeah, Shakespeare's speaking here, but we don't typically, I don't know if this was a saying, in circulation at the time. Empty tigers. Yeah, if a tiger's empty, he's darn hungry and super fierce, right? What an interesting way to say that. I just wanted to point that out. We have these little phrases like this that we don't hear. They don't make sense unless we think about them. We're like, I get what he means. A hungry tiger. Okay, just a little example. And there's tons of them. Okay, line 50. There we go. Paris. We want to look at his reasons for trying to apprehend or stop Romeo. I'm going to give you a few. Number one is he's angry with Romeo because Romeo killed Tybalt, and Tybalt's death is what made Juliet die of heartbreak. That's what he thinks. Does that make sense? He's angry with Romeo because Romeo killed Tybalt, and Tybalt's death is the sadness by which Juliet, Paris's bride, died. So he hates Romeo. Number two, here he comes to do some villainous shame. He's coming into, now he's a Montague, approaching the Capulet tomb. Why else would a Montague come to a Capulet tomb other than to vandalize it? He's coming there to desecrate or vandalize Juliet's tomb. They're supposed to be enemies, Montagues and Capulets. Paris is making a judgment that Romeo's there to vandalize the tomb. So he should be stopped because Paris is there for the opposite reason, to venerate or to honor the Juliet's tomb, not to vandalize it. So that's why you have to stop Romeo. And then the last reason Paris has to fight Romeo is that Romeo is banished. He shouldn't be in Verona at all. He says, I have to stop you because it's illegal for you to be here. So Paris has taken the law into his own hands as he goes and challenges Romeo to a fight. Now they end up fighting, and Romeo slays Paris, unfortunately. So we have another death there. We're going to jump all the way to line 96. Okay. As Romeo enters the tomb and he sees Juliet lying there, okay, he says, starting right here, he says, "Thou art not conquered. Beauty's, ensign, beauty's sign on you is yet there. It's crimson in thy lips." So you have color in your lips. You have color in your cheeks. Death's paleness is not on you. Okay, you don't look dead, Juliet. Now, why is this so awesome for Romeo to say? Because Juliet isn't dead. She actually isn't. She's actually coming around and reviving. So color is returning to her. All right? I don't know. Maybe she's even warming up, and Romeo's completely oblivious to this. Now, he says this to exaggerate her beauty, and death doesn't even look like she's dead. But it's also ironic because she actually isn't dead. And maybe she does have color, and she doesn't look pale and doesn't look like she's actually dead. All right? So, clever. Again, Shakespeare just poking poking the bear a little bit more, teasing us with this idea that, we want them to live. We want them to live happily ever after, yet they're not going to. Line 155. As we keep going down, we have Friar Lawrence showing up on the scene, and I believe we have in line 155 area here. Here it is, where Juliet first wakes up, and Friar Lawrence is there to take her away, and he says this: "A greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents. Somebody else had a different plan than ours." Okay, you could say it's God. God had a different plan here. He contradicted our plan. You could say it's fate, and I think the theme of fate would hold this true. Their fate, their their fate or their fortune, as we heard Romeo saying, "I'm fortune's fool." Their fortune or fate was contradicted. It wasn't meant to be. And so Friar Lawrence says, "Our plan didn't work. It wasn't meant to be. So come, and your husband's dead, and I'll hide you." And, I guess that's how it is. Now, Friar Lawrence hears people coming and runs away. Line 170, we want to keep going down. Right here is that Juliet, oh man, there's so much here. Juliet sees, now Romeo's already drank the potion, he's died. It's a good scene, go watch it. And Juliet very quickly realizes Romeo's dead and doesn't want to leave. And she puts two and two together, puts the whole scene, figures out he drank poison, he thought she was dead, she tries to drink the poison, etc. Now, it's not working, yet people are coming. The watchmen, the guards, all these guys. So she says this, she grabs Romeo's dagger, and she says, "This is thy sheath." A sheath is what you put your sword or dagger in. And she puts the sword or the dagger in her sheath. The sheath is her chest, her heart. She stabs it in without hesitation, doesn't think too much, does it very quickly. So this is a very, very quick action, very quick thought, very brutal way to die. And I would, I think Romeo gets the easy way to die. He just drinks poison and his body shuts down. Juliet stabs herself, bleeds out, and dies, and falls on Romeo's body. They're both dead. Now, later on, when they come and they see Romeo's sword in Juliet, what do they think? You would think, oh, Romeo murdered Juliet. Now, that's going to be weird already, because Juliet is not supposed to be alive. She's murdered again. She's re-killed. That would be weird to witness. So Juliet dies, and then we go to line 195 here, or thereabouts. Okay. Here is the prince that says, okay, what happened here? Why are we all summoned to the graveyard in the middle of the night? In fact, the whole town is in uproar. Capulet and Montague come running to the tomb as well, and the friar is captured. All these things happen very quickly. And the watchman says, "Here lies the County Paris slain." So Paris is dead. Romeo is dead. Juliet's dead, who was dead before and now newly killed again. And Prince is like, what the heck happened? Let us uncover this story. Let's figure it out. So we have in line 210 a little piece of information. It's skimmed over so quick. If we miss it, we miss it. So I don't want you to miss it. Alas, Montague comes. He says, what's going on? I mean, I am already filled with grief because he says this, my wife's dead tonight. My wife has died. Grief of my son's exile. So has stopped her breath. Okay, what further news do you have that's going to break my heart? Okay, poor Montague comes. His wife had just died of heartbreak because of Romeo's banishment that night, and yet he is in for another whole set of terrible, tragic news. And what do you do? This is interesting because in the face of such despair, we could either be more despairing and more resentful and more angry, or you could say enough's enough. Okay, let's solve this. This has gone too far. And I think that as the end we'll see when they say this has gone too far, we'll end the feud. That is very honorable, a way to deal with this tragedy. And I think it's probably the best way to deal with this tragedy. So they do the right thing at the end. All right. We want to go to line 230 where the friar is giving us his evidence. See this. So the friar comes and he is captured and he says, look, I have to tell you, I have to reveal everything I know. I know most, and I hope that in telling you, I condemn myself, but I hope that I pardon myself. So he complies. He's very, very honest with his story. He says all of this. And as he says this, he's telling the whole story of what happened. Okay. And we get the recap of the whole story, the scheme and their plan, all of that stuff. The fact he marries Romeo and Juliet, the fact that he had faked Juliet's death, etc. The fact that he had hoped to mend the feud by their marriage and all that. He says, if I have to be punished by the severest law, so be it. But I have to tell you the truth. And the prince says, we've known you for a holy man. So this is almost to be like, we know you're telling the truth, and I don't think we're going to condemn you too harshly here. Okay. They bring in some other evidence here. Eventually we get a reference to the letter. But what I want to jump down to is this line, the final lines of the prince, where he says this. Now, because, we'll look at this. Okay. He says this. Where be these enemies? They get the full story, and it's like, it's because of the feud that this happened. Where are you, darn Capulet and Montague? He says this. He throws it right in their face. He says, see, what a scourge, what a punishment is laid upon or is thrown at you because of your own hate. See how punished you are by your own hate. That heaven or that fate, right, that fortune finds a way to kill your joy, to kill your children with love. Like the absolute irony here. Okay, the absolute responsibility that you have for bringing this destruction upon your children because of the feud that you've perpetuated. It's your fault, he says. He says, an eye for winking at your discourse too. I didn't deal with you and your stupid feud harshly enough. Because of that, I'm punished too. How is the prince punished? He's lost a brace of kinsmen, a bunch of family. Who? He lost Mercutio, his cousin. And Mercutio and Paris are related, so he loses his other cousin, Paris, his other relative. He says, we are all punished. None of us did enough to end this darn feud and resolve our differences. And I guess that speech was motivating enough because we have here, the very end of the story, Capulet and Montague resolving to end their feud, shaking hands and vowing to erect golden statues of their children in memory and in tribute to their love. They are actual, they're men here. They acknowledge the truth and they make amends. They don't just perpetuate their feud and get more angry at each other. They realize what it's done. They're honest with it. They make a judgment that they need to extend forgiveness and forget the feud. Okay? And that is the end of our play. At the end of our play, there is never a story, as the prince says, a famous line here. There never was a story more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. In other words, there's never a tragic love story more than that of Romeo and Juliet. And to this day, Romeo and Juliet remains the benchmark, the standard, the thing after every other tragic love story is replicated. They become the two lovers that everybody knows. When you think about lovers, sacrificing to the end, you think of Romeo and Juliet even to this day. That's how powerful this story is. The prince's words ring true even in 2020. Amazing. And that, my friends, is our look at the play Romeo and Juliet. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it was an enjoyable experience to listen to this story, to study it a little bit, to analyze some of it. We have finished it up, and the tragedy is that the main characters have died. They're gone, Romeo and Juliet. They don't get to live happily ever after. And I think we're very used to those Disney stories where people live happily ever after. And yet, at the same time, the story ends happily. It's a tragedy, yet Shakespeare doesn't leave us hanging and depressed. He leaves us hopeful in the town of Verona, that the town of Verona will see hope, that they'll bounce back. And I think, it's important for us to experience stories of hope, even though tragedies an absolute reality in our own lives. In this story, we also see it ending happily. It has ended the feud, and that is a good thing. And so sometimes the worst evils, and we don't even recognize how often this is, but looking back, sometimes we could see how the worst evils, the worst suffering, it's actually a reason for that because it brings out something better, a greater good. And that is a very mysterious thing. We suffer quite a bit, especially in our day and age right now. Maybe you have individual sufferings and things like that. And, as evil and as destructive and as tragic as some of those things might be, who knows the greater good that will come out of those situations. And very often they do. And that is a story of a lot of people who go through suffering or periods of darkness or hardship. There's a deeper purpose to some of that stuff that's extremely mysterious. And this story, even though it's a story, is great evidence for that. The fact that through something very evil, the suicide and death and the tragic ending of our two lovers, something very good happens. And that is the ending of a very evil feud. So, leave you with that thought as well. All right. That's it for it. That's it for a lot of things. I don't know if I'm going to be back here. Maybe. Love to see. But I will see you soon. And I'm appreciative of you tuning in. And like always, I ask that you don't be lame. DBL. And have a good day. Take care, guys. It was a pleasure going through this story with you.